Welcome, everybody, to the first session of the day and the most important session of the day. Don't tell Durf and Nate Bell that I said that after. I am so excited. I've been wanting to get Maggie Umber out to visit us for a while, and both of us were dealing with some health stuff, and then that pandemic thing happened. But the stars aligned, and actually really aligned, because Maggie's new book is just dropped. This is like the second show you brought it to,
No,
right?
this is the day.
It's
the advanced copy
let's call
debut.
yes, this is the premiere.
Yes,
which
yes.
means, you can get it upstairs. I read it last night. It is amazing. Chrysanthemum Under the Waves. And I think I'm going to know how to spell chrysanthemum by the time I finish.
I still spell it wrong.
Did you?
On things.
I was
like,
going to ask you about that.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, I'm going to quickly introduce you. I know a few of you here know Maggie's work, but I'm hoping that some are new, and we're going to introduce you to her work and at least a good chunk of her career in our time here before questions. But Maggie is one of those cartoonists who is hard to describe, which is part of why I love her work so much. A printmaker, a publisher, an artist, a cartoonist, and somebody who is increasingly seems to be interested in also maybe doing a little bit of animation and other stuff as I'm getting into programming, I've noticed.
Yeah.
And so I have a feeling there's scratchboard artists, and of course a toy maker.
Oh yeah.
I have a feeling before you're done, there's going to be almost no media.
I also do game design sometimes.
Oh, you do?
Just like little
I've
things.
noticed more and more cartoonists, artists are crossing into game design, and also one of the best Patreon pages out there, which I have actually only joined recently, but I will be staying because it's full of cool process stuff. And I first I actually kind of read a few things early on, including the Shirley Jackson piece, which is the inspiration for Chrysanthemum, and we'll come back to that. But I first really just went head over heels for your work with 2017's Sound of Snow Falling. And so I was hoping maybe we could start with that and some of your stuff in, I think broadly conceived, thinking about kind of animal ways of knowing and communicating and how this form could do it. And then we could talk about Chrysanthemum, which is, I think, of a piece in that it's working in largely wordless form, but also really different and new. It seems like it marks a new chapter in your work going forward, although certainly not a break. So, Sound of Snow Falling. I just wanted to this is a book that I mentioned to you that we taught in a class that Patty and I did together, a seminar on comics and the environment, and people really dug it. Like it was, all the things that some of the critics, I think, thought were like a little challenging about it, like its darkness, it's that it takes time to read. The students in the class were like, no, that's the whole point. You have to immerse yourself. And they were like, they got it. And I just thought we'd talk maybe for a second about your love of owls, because owls lived with you for a lot during this period. And, I know you've gotten that question a lot, but I wonder if you kind of think back on it now with some distance, if you have a sense of why the owl in particular brought you into this kind of interest in nature and the kind of stories that nature can tell if we stop talking and listen. So I'll stop talking and listen.
I mean, both my parents were super into nature and like sharing nature with me, and like there was field guides to birds that my mom said, like, when I was like, I don't know if this is how true this story is, but she said when I was 2, she would leave me in the high chair with like the field guide of birds, and I would flip through it. And one day I was like looking at a bird and saying button. And she was like, oh my gosh, my child is kind of dumb. I'm like, man, Mom. But then she's like, no, not button. And then she looked and she said, bunting. And she was like, oh, you know the birds. And so she went through and she said, I knew she said there was only 2 birds in the book I didn't know, which was flamingo. And I don't remember what the other one was, but yeah, so I really liked birds from a young age, and then my dad like taught me all the trees, and he would just like the whole family would go out camping, and my dad just like took all the neighborhood kids out on walks all the time. And I grew up in Minnesota, and so that we grew up by a river, like really close by, and a couple lakes and marshland, and we had like a pair of great horned owls that lived in our neighborhood, and we'd hear them hooting, like calling to each other, and then we'd find like owl pellets. I know there was one time we'd find owl pellets on the driveway, and my dad and I dissected them. And yeah.
There's nothing like dissecting an owl pellet.
It's cool.
I know, it's amazing what you find. It does feel like archaeology, like
Yes.
of a whole other way of living and being, and the kind of realization of what this whole night world of hunting and living is, right? This is, I mean, part of what is, I think, so exciting about spending time with this book, and I've spent many, many hours with this book, is that it takes us into a world that is silent, although we spend time with the book and you hear the sounds of it as well, as the title suggests. It's nocturnal, right? This is, and it's a lot of it is winter.
Yeah.
And so these are times where we're not, often humans are not, we're in our shelters, we're in our diurnal world, and we're, I think, more have a sense, sometimes an arrogant sense, that we know the world of diurnal nature, but you really want to take us here into a place that is, even when it takes place in our own backyards, and I go to sleep with the sounds of the owls many nights, it's not a world we know, right, at all. So you did a lot of research for this book, I imagine.
Yeah. I read like every book on owls that I could find. And then I also like searched online. I did like a Google alert for owls, so I would get stuff in my email all the time. And then I watched like owl cams for 4 years. But the whole thing started as like a biology paper in high school where I had to write, our teacher assigned us like this paper where you had to imagine yourself as an animal. And so I was like, I really like owls.
Are you a night person?
It's weird I'm not, and I don't understand because I feel like every book I've done is like related to the night, which I don't understand. I'm a morning person. I just, if it gets dark, I fall asleep. Like, I don't know. Yeah. Like right now I'm considering doing a book on bats. And and just like, what is the deal with me? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, but some of it must be about that, less about the night itself than about this reminder, like the ocean itself, right? There's all parts of the world that we don't get to experience, and this is your way of getting to know it. Your love of bats continued into 270, some beautiful watercolors, and again, that's upstairs for sale. But I also really encourage the Patreon to see some of the kind of process and thinking. You write beautifully about your work too. And that is, and at some point, I want to talk also about some of the prose. People often think of you as a wordless, storyteller, and it's true. You use words very sparingly. I remember you once said that you initially thought Sound of Snow Falling was going to have text, and then, when you were told, actually, it totally reads without text. It was like almost a relief, and it does read. Like, it tells an amazing story, but you have to slow down to read it, right? It's not a comic that you can go done. You have to slow down, even just to get like you do at night, to kind of adjust to the night space of the paintings. What made you decide to use acrylic and canvas board for it? Or did it just feel right? So it's not the most common medium for comics, right?
Yeah. I guess, I come from fine art, and like when I started out in high school, like I was at an arts high school, and I'm trying to remember, at some point while I was there, I started painting in acrylics, and like I was introduced to acrylics before I was introduced to oil paints, and acrylic and oil are so different. Like, I feel like because I began with acrylic, oil just has never sat with me in the same, like I think more like coherently in acrylic. And then I took oil painting classes and became allergic to them. So it's hard for me to like,
And a lot of the materials you have to use with them can be hard for people with
Exactly.
sensitivities.
Yeah.
Acrylics, that was why my mother switched to acrylics, I remember, for similar reasons.
Ah.
I remember in our class, Patty, right, that one of the art students was like trying to think about how it might have worked different in oils. But you have worked with a lot of watercolor since then,
Yeah.
which captures a little more of that fluidity.
Yeah.
And we'll look at some examples of that in Chrysanthemum. So the one thing I also wanted to just ask you about, so this is an exhibition that Maggie was kind enough to let us exhibit 2 pages from, which I since even more kindly she was willing to sell to Beth and I for our wall. But this was an exhibit that Beth and I curated at the Billy Ireland Cartoon Library and Museum in 2000 and COVID. 21. It was
Sounds
like,
right.
yeah. And was really one of the kind of highlights, the visual anchors. People really gravitated towards it. And part of what we were thinking about with this piece in particular was how graphic narrative more broadly can help us think about the environment in ways that maybe other media struggle with. I mean, each media has its own, affordances, but there's something about graphic narrative of, your generation in particular that's interested in environmental themes that seems to be really interested in this one. Pollination from the Warmer anthology is another nice example. A terrific anthology of climate change comics that really is trying to think about how nature connects in ways that kind of aren't human-centered. Is that seems like that's a running theme in a lot of your work from this period.
Yeah.
Like the humans aren't really there much, right?
Yeah. It just, I don't know, I just wasn't interested in including people. I was like, they're not a factor. I mean, they're like, there's hints, but I think with one thing, I don't know if people notice this, but with Sound of Snow Falling, the gaze is like a big factor for me. Like the way that I was very careful to almost never have the owls looking at the viewer.
Yeah. Yeah, I do. And when they are, usually their eyes are closed. And why is that? Just to kind of keep us in a more voyeuristic place?
I mean, I spent so much time online when I was doing research looking at photographs people had taken of owls, and it seemed like a lot of people wanted the owls to be looking at them and centering them and their experience. And I thought, no, this is about the owl in its environment. And I think there's like one point where the owl is looking, but they're not looking at the viewer, they're looking through the viewer at, what's, past it.
Yeah. I mean, I think that certainly is something that comes through in the works, that there's a kind of humility that these ask for in the face of nature, that it's not about us at all, right? That it's about thinking about cycles. And I really love the way you kind of capture here the kind of cycle of the birth of the owl chicks. Are owl babies called chicks?
Owlets?
Owlets?
I don't know. Owl chicks.
And then, of course, the diurnal phases of the moon on the opposite page. Again, this kind of sense of time's passage in a way that doesn't kind of necessarily fit with our kind of modern clock time at all. Yeah, it's something that just really struck me. And you kind of, even that whole period of your work before you kind of stepped away a bit is really very much focused on animals interacting with other animals without people. This collection, how would you describe Time Capsule? It's kind of like something between a graphic narrative and a sketchbook kind of.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's definitely a sketchbook novella. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's it was so. I had finished I think I finished Sound of Snow Falling in like 2014. Like it was done, like my work on it, and then. But I was like really nervous about putting it out because like the longest thing I had published before that was Startled Maggie, which is like a 30-page mini comic. And I just thought, no one knows who I am. Who's gonna buy like this like big, expensive graphic novel from like someone no one knows? And so I wanted to have like an in-between book that was like more affordable and black and white and more digestible that would kind of get my name out there. And so I made it in like, I can't remember if it took me a month, but 2 months. I did it just really fast, no pencils, just straight to ink in like a couple of different sketchbooks. And I also hadn't drawn in a while, so I was like teaching myself how to draw again. And I was thinking a lot about how we're like in the middle of a mass extinction event and how even like more so at the time that I was drawing it, which was like 2015, I think like language and culture in animals was much more acknowledged and like emotion. And so I just wanted to like sort of have like a reminder in very abstract comic form that there's all this amazing stuff happening outside of humans that we're just totally losing and not paying attention to the loss.
Yeah, no, and it's I mean, putting all that work together, including We Are Hungry, which was that before or after?
It's a weird one because I made it in 2018. It's lino. I hand carved stamps, and then I that was when I had just moved to Chicago, and I printed it. It was something I made specifically for the Patreon, and but it wasn't it was never printed back then.
Oh.
But I didn't do anything. I had it in a show.
So it was more just kind of scans in the Patreon of the prints?
And it was in a gallery show, and then
because I don't think I ever saw it in print until I just picked it up.
It just came out last year in print.
Okay.
But it was also a reading.
Yes,
So,
actually, I think I even have I stole it from your website, so I can't say but yeah, of doing it as a kind of, almost like a kind of shadow puppet show across the printed images.
Yes.
Yeah, it looks cool. That would be,
I,
we gotta bring that back. We gotta do that. This is also something I hope we can have time to come back to, is kind of thinking about your work as a printer. But I do think it's, I don't want to spend, because, I think part of what's really exciting about this chapter of your career, it seems to me as an outsider looking in, is that you have, I think, finally this kind of remarkable thing you were part of that was also a remarkably all-consuming thing, which was being a co-founder of 2D Cloud Press, which is, I mean, I have edited an academic journal, which is a very tiny thing, and that was overwhelming and almost broke me into pieces. So starting a press and publishing some of the more, I mean, I think the work that you guys were doing in the 2010s, some of the more adventurous work that was pushing the boundaries of the form, but also must have been a printing challenge for each individual work. I look at these things, I'm like, I can just start to visualize all the printing headaches that would have come with each of these works, including your own, right? That must have taken you a long time to get the registers right, to pick up the colors just right. And you wrote really movingly about some of the challenges of the economics of trying to run an independent avant-garde press, and the toll it takes emotionally of being invested in comics as both a creator, but also, of course, for all cartoonists, the business side of it. And then on top of that, you're managing a press and other people's work and careers as well. Was it hard to make space for your own creative processes in the middle of all that?
I would say if If I hadn't been doing like that, I would have had a larger output for sure.
Sure, yeah.
But yeah.
You were, I mean, you were giving the gift of getting other people's work out.
Yeah.
And a lot of, important, I think, really great careers came out of that work.
Oh, yeah.
But it must have, and I know actually, the final, even Chrysanthemum, you said, was originally going to be published with 2D Cloud.
Yeah.
And then you finally decided, no, need to kind of start over. But the burdens make sense to me, right? The headaches, the sleepless nights, worrying about money. I think I remember you once described spending your honeymoon money on with your ex-husband on just keeping the press going or paying a printer's bill.
Yeah, it was for the first graphic novel we put out. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Yeah. I mean, that's the kind of sacrifice that is entailed in doing that. And yet you also, I know it's hard to walk away from, right? That sense of responsibility.
Yeah.
And, part of what kind of happens to me as I read Chrysanthemum is I see a bit of a farewell to all that in there, with both sadness and maybe a certain degree of freedom to kind of start your own kind of next chapter of your work. Was it a hard decision to go to self-publishing for this?
Oh yeah, I'm trying to remember. It's like, oh man, it's hard to remember how it like. I think I also just got to the point where I thought I can do this. It took me a long time to just have the confidence because when I was at 2D Cloud, I didn't do any production. That was so I came out of it. When I left, I didn't know how to do that stuff. And so 2023, I did I did those 5 new books,
Right.
and that was teaching myself production.
Yeah, and here's a couple. I mean, there's just a big burst after a quiet period, right? Dealing with some health issues and pandemic and all of that, and working with different media too. And so it was part of about a chance of starting to learn how to be a self-publisher. I mean, kind of all cartoonists start out to some degree as self-publishers with zines, and I know you've been really involved with zine communities and zine making workshops over the years. But self-publishing on this scale of Chrysanthemum is a whole other thing. So and was it a good experience? I mean, did it stress you out waiting for the big crate of books to come?
Yes. It was very, very scary. I was really worried they wouldn't arrive in time, but they got here in plenty of time.
That's awesome.
Yeah, lots of worries, but it all worked out.
Yeah, and they did a great job. I mean, it's gorgeous. So let's talk about Chrysanthemum, which is, as you and I were talking about before, is a huge. I think it's a huge change, right? We've gone from a lot of work. I mean, there were some autobio stuff throughout, but a lot of work that really was about decentering the human. And in an essay that I think you since took down, which is of course absolutely right. But I remember you talked about the way in which publishing is also to some degree about decentering yourself, right? You're putting other people's work forward, and I think especially as a woman in comics and comics publishing, all the more so for all the reasons of structural sexism and the rest. And so coming back to a place where I feel like you're not in this directly, there's not a self-portrait of you, but
except the front cover.
Oh, except the front cover.
That is actually me, but it's hard to tell. It's very abstract.
I see it.
It's the hardest thing to see, but I'm there.
You know what's funny is I remember seeing the earlier version of this cover.
It was much easier to see.
And it was easier to see, and I was like, I kind of love that too, but this is awesome. But you allow your face to disappear, but it's disappearing behind your name, which is actually even strengthens my sense that this really is, in some sense, the most Maggie Umber centered work. Not that you weren't everywhere in that other work, even though a lot of it is elliptical and through kind of parable and Gothic tales and poems. And you write about in the introduction, and I said I think the prose is really gorgeous. If you don't mind, I'd love to just read the opening paragraph. So this is again hand printed, like letter by letter. It's crazy. So it begins. James Harris snuck up on me when I was distracted by other things. I gradually became aware of a tall man in a blue suit who often smoked a cigar. He was a writer who sometimes worked as a bookseller, and he lived in New York. I could never quite recall his age or the details of his face. He went by Mr. Harris or James, and informally as Jamie, Jim, Jimmy, or just plain Harris. He must have been present at the Autoptic Festival in August 2015. I'd finished drawing Time Capsule, and I was worried over printing issues when I ran into Hannah Blumenreich there, and she mentioned she was making a comic for Rob Kirby's anthology, The Shirley Jackson Project. So you kind of tell this story about this character. I'm not enough of a Shirley Jackson stan, but I want to be. I didn't get the James Harris reference at first, but can you say a little bit about who James Harris is?
He comes from like the 17th century Scottish English ballad, which is collected in like the Child Ballads. And Shirley Jackson did like a book. She did this book of short stories called The Lottery and Other Stories, which I think there was like also a subtitle at one point that was The Adventures of James Harris.
Oh.
Yeah. And he shows up in a lot of the stories, but with just little, like if you don't know to look for him, you won't know he's there. Like it's like you'll read this whole story and there's one sentence, the man in the blue suit in the background. And so I read like a scholarly article kind of talking about about the character. And I just thought, what? He's everywhere in her books? And so I went and read everything again because I had all her books. And I was like finding him everywhere, even in her novels. And I was like, oh, wow. And then I was like, I want to do a whole book about this. Yeah.
And he is the kind of constant figure who shows up in different guises in these different. It's kind of it's like a story collection, but it's all of one piece. Definitely of a piece. And the first one was this one here, Tooth, which was back in 2016. Is that right?
Yeah.
So you've been working on this for a long time.
Yeah.
This just some pages I'll put up in the background so you worked in a bunch of different techniques and media here. Do you have any kind of, a lot of it is kind of watercolor wash. What was some of your thinking as you made choices for what mediums to work with as you were working in this book?
I think I always like to challenge myself. And if there's something that I haven't tried before, it's really nice. Because when I started out as like a fine artist, like I was always told, oh, you need to just stick to one medium. You need to like do a series. And I was like, why? It's so boring. But then once I started working at comics, I was like, oh, there's a reason to, stick to one medium, stick to one style in a single story to make the narrative flow. So I wanted to do each story with a different medium, and then it kind of feeds into the storytelling. No,
and it's. I mean, this is deeply steeped in Gothic, in dreams, in the kind of fragments that become a whole. And I think on first read it feels pretty dark. It feels it's kind of a sense of ominousness and grief. And yet somehow at the end it feels like it adds up to something that is much more, despite the individual stories, feels to me much more hopeful about that it leaves, this is a kind of stand-in protagonist throughout the different versions of the woman, sometimes victim, sometimes witch, seems to, if only through surviving all these encounters and being dragged to hell or drowned or the various things that kind of occur throughout these stories, the kind of recurrence or repetition of this figure seems to suggest resilience. Is that something you intended, or am I just so desperate for happy endings that I'm projecting that onto? And I do have a tendency in that direction. My students are always saying, I think you're reading a happy ending in there, dude. I don't think it's there.
No, that's very accurate. That's like true, very true of my whole life. Yeah, it makes sense.
And I think, I never like to ask authors, right, about the autobiographical elements of things that aren't explicitly autobiographical, but you do invite it a little bit, right? In the end, in the postscript, which again, I thought it was beautiful. You say, Chrysanthemum Under the Waves took me 6+ years to complete. During this time, my husband ended our marriage. This was at the outset of Sound of Snow Falling tour and a complete shock to me. After I lost my marriage, I fell into grief and mourning. And then you say, after our divorce, I followed to Chicago to help save the publishing company and to focus on my cartooning career, and my health deteriorated. And then the world was devoured by a pandemic. You're talking about real things, right?
Yeah.
Not the kind of allegories and myths, but like your real life. And of course, all of us got swallowed up in that last chapter. And as somebody who also has struggled with health issues and autoimmune challenges, I wonder if you just have a sense of, because I felt it here, but I don't think I could put it into words, of how the questions about health and illness, which, always were a factor in your more environmental stuff, right? Thinking about the health of the planet and the species. But here you really are thinking about your own personal health, that mourning that all of us who get diagnosed with a chronic illness go through a mourning period, I think. I've talked with so many people about it. How did that play out in thinking through this book for you?
Oh, it was everything. Like, just like, there's certain pages where, like, it's like a record of that time for me. Like, I'm trying to remember what, Those Fucking Eyes, the first, which is, it's also in the Rust Belt Review, Volume 6, because most of these stories, not all, there's a few that don't, but most of them appear in other publications. That one, I finished that, and I think within a week I was hospitalized. Maybe less. Like, I was so ill. Like,
so you were finishing it as you were
I knew I had to go. And I was like, I need to finish. But it was like, it was not good. It was not a good time. Yeah.
What was the order that you wrote them in, the order in which they're here?
No, not at all.
No,
yeah.
Kind of...
Yeah. It's actually, cause like, yeah, it's like, that is one thing that, like, Rain, like, he chose the order. Like, I had them in a different order, and he put them in that order, and I thought, at first I was kind of like, oh, come on. And then I thought, it actually does read quite well.
It does.
Yeah.
No, I mean, it's, and I think, for that kind of, as somebody who you've been talking about your work with for so long,
exactly.
There's also somebody who just kind of, gets it on that intuitive level, which is always valuable. Can I ask you before I'm going to turn over to questions, I promise. But, oops, I'm going to turn down the sound here.
Oh yeah, don't put the sound on that one.
But this is just a little process video that you shared about some of your techniques, and you're very generous with sharing. I noticed from your on your Patreon that a lot of folks just get so excited to watch the process and try things out. You clearly have a born teacher in you as well. But there's also, like, it's something I've been talking with students about a lot lately, is this kind of real interest in this digital age, even though you have interest in the digital as well, but that kind of tactile feel of moving the knife through the lino cut, for example, or pushing the hand-stamped letters or
Yeah.
stencils down on the
Yeah.
page and trying to, you have a very much, even when you're not printing, even when your art isn't printing but is drawn or watercolored, there's a printer sensibility to all of this. And I just wonder if you could say about your clearly your love of printing and your kind of ways in which you've worked to kind of bring printing techniques into your narrative.
Yeah. I started out as like a painter, but then like in high school and college, I got introduced to printmaking, and yeah, it is, I guess I'm like a very tactile, physical, like I think with my hands. And I think the connection between my hands and my mind, it's just like really intense. And so, yeah, it's a kind of thinking with, I don't know how to describe it, but it's like, I think that printmaking is very much suited to that connection. And so I really like I like having to think about the technical aspects of creation. And yeah, it was very interesting getting to hear you talk about and yeah, I feel weird. I don't know if it's pronounced intaglio or intaglio, but I studied it. I majored it in college. That was like my focus area. And unfortunately, I haven't been able to do it since then because I became allergic to that as well. But it's just like, it's just a wonderful way of like connecting to the materials. And then I don't know, like it really matters, like the physicality and the emotion just come together. Like there's no, and the thought, there's no separation. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, as I said, as somebody who loves the kind of history of print in relationship to graphic narrative, I think that's part of why I just, in addition to my love of Sound of Snow Falling, why I'm so drawn to so much of your work. But I don't want to be a hog. I want to kind of turn it over to others who might have questions. And if not, I have always more. So, but I don't want to be greedy. Me? Yep.
So as somebody who is also like doing a lot of works focusing on the natural world and maybe more like non-human centric elements, did you find yourself like spending more time in nature, or like did you have anything that really kind of helped you get in that headspace of like capturing things from a different perspective?
I think I do spend a lot of time like outside, but I think like the well that I was like working from was like all the time I spent growing up, like running around in the woods. And yeah, that was where I kept coming back to. I just have like so many like visual memories of like what like snow looks like and sounds like, all the different, I don't know, like to me, like if I hear like when it's really, really cold, I can tell just by like how flat sounds get. And it's like those kind of things really, yeah, that's where I'm drawing from. Yeah. Yeah.
Earlier in talking about chrysanthemum, which I haven't read yet, you talked about that each of the stories used a different medium.
Yeah.
And that you felt that there was a connection between the medium you chose and what you wanted to do in that story. And I guess I have two questions. One, does that extend to other work that you do? Which you feel like you choose a particular medium because you want to do something particular in the story, and then even if the answer to that is no.
Oh, it's yes. It's yes. Yeah.
How do those come together? Is it just something you intuit, or is it more crafted? Do you think to yourself, oh, I want to achieve this, so it would make sense that I return to this? If you could just talk a little bit more about that connection. So,
I mean, I think I do think oh, I want to use this so I can achieve this, but that's like, it's not necessarily the path I end up going down, because I might try it and then it's like, oh, this doesn't read right at all. It's not communicating. It doesn't have the right emotion. It feels weird. This is wrong. So like, Bun World, which is Scratchboard, that did not, it started out black and white. And it's like a 100-page comic, and this is the first volume. And I tried so many different mediums. Like, I thought, well, it has to be in color, but I tried watercolor, I tried marker, I tried, like, I'm trying to remember. There was so many different things, and every time it was like, this just isn't good enough. This isn't coming through. And I think I was also like, the only time I think mostly have worked with the Lightbox is with Bun World, like, because I would do little drawings and then collage them together with the Lightbox. And when I was doing the marker stuff,
I was going to see if I can pull that up while you're talking.
Oh, yes. When I was doing the marker stuff and the drawing, I would see the light coming through the Lightbox. And I was like, oh, I want that effect, but I don't know how to get it. And then somehow I thought of doing Scratchboard. Like, I did Scratchboard as a kid, and I just thought it was just so cool. And then I like ordered a bunch of Scratchboard paper and tried it, and I was like, oh, this is what I was trying to do. But it still took like a really long time of working with the Scratchboard to get it right. Yeah. Oh.
Thank you.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
And there's a good, on the Patreon, there's a great account of some of the process you went through to arrive in your final place. And I always love process stuff. So fascinating.
I have a question.
Oh, yes.
I have a question somewhat specifically about Time Capsule.
Oh, yeah.
So that book, it ends, and I think you were talking about this a little bit earlier, but it ends with this like very directly polemical statement about the sixth mass extinction.
Yeah.
And most of that book, or really all of that book, I see it as a narrative,
Yeah.
kind of,
Yeah.
like a hyper experimental narrative.
Yeah.
Both just in terms of how it's drawn, how it's written, how it's packaged. And I was wondering if, I don't know, if you see any connection between the polemical statement that you make at the end of that book and the formal experience you.
Do you have it on?
I don't have that with me. I have a.
Because
have
I
that
was
at
gonna
home.
say, and this is the same thing with pollination. That's like when I was like working more with rain, and so I can't remember what this, because I think he might have been thinking that it was too abstract, like people wouldn't pick up on the messaging, and so he wanted like something to pull it together. And so the poetry on either end is written by him, but he also did not want me to credit him, like, which I guess I'm doing now. But but he wrote that stuff, and then we put it in. But unfortunately, I think this was the thing I was talking about in the printing, because I was rereading that. I wrote that thing at the beginning of Chrysanthemum kind of a while ago, and I was like, what was I referencing when I said there was printing issues? But I think Time Capsule we didn't realize that the paper, because I used this like paper that I found that was very dark purple, and it was on a black background. We didn't realize that the colors would print so similar, and so his poem was pretty much not readable on the front, which we're like, oh no. But I mean, that's printing. Sometimes you just don't know what's gonna happen. Like, I don't know. Yeah. But he also wrote the poem, which he did get credit for, in Pollination.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nobody's going to ask about the little dolls.
Oh, no.
So how did this start? I mean, you have a bunch of them upstairs at your
yeah.
table. I love these guys.
That's, I used to be a guard for about like over a decade at an art museum, and I would walk around and just think about stuff. And I know I had a coworker that would make like stuff out of like knitting, and I just, yeah, I don't know. My great grandmother was a seamstress, and my mom is really into quilting, and so I just thought I should make toys. I was like, I should just learn how to make toys. And so I started learning how to crochet and knit, and then I thought amigurumi was really cool, and then I made one of these, and it looked really weird, and they've evolved. Early versions look very strange. And then I always did little drawings, designs of the toys, and that's like, people would always say, when are you going to make a comic for the toys? And I was like, I don't know how to make the narrative. And then when I was really sick in the hospital, I asked a friend to, there was a bookshelf in my hospital room, and I said, can you take, I was too weak at the time, I would have done it myself, but I said, can you take one of the shelves out? I know, because I went and wiggled it. I said, I know it comes out. Can you pull it out and set it on my lap so I can use it as a desk? And then I asked like the hospital staff to like give me whatever art supplies they had, and I started drawing it. And so that's why there's like weird errors, like spelling errors and stuff at the beginning, because I was so malnourished that I couldn't spell anymore. So, yeah.
Is it at the beginning of
Of this Fun World, yeah, that's like the beginning. Like,
and these are
yeah.
the kind of narrative world of the toys.
Yeah.
That's how I read it, and I kind of love seeing them come to life here. So the toys came first.
Yeah.
And then Fun World is their it's their spin-off, their narrative.
Yeah, and it takes place in a world of food because I couldn't eat. And it was all the things that I wanted to eat. Yeah.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you.
Oh, yeah.
I think we're coming up. Any last questions before let Maggie go, and you guys can go check out her table? Oh, right. Oh, yes.
You mentioned, of course, your very early influence from the bird guides and things like that.
Yeah.
I'm just curious, do you count any other like artist influence? I think of, to be honest, I sort of see your stuff as like Charlie Harper meets film noir or something.
Oh.
I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Oh.
Like even from movies, because
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
just the lovely, chiaroscuro and everything in your style.
Yeah. Yeah. Very. That's really well put. There's like so many influences. I'm a voracious consumer of everything I can get my hands on. And so it all filters in. Like, I just did like a podcast interview with my friend Dimitri, he's like a painter. And I did a painting on Patreon last week, and I was like, I'm like, I see Dimitri in here. Like, I see his paintings. He's like, I didn't realize this would happen, but I've been looking at his work so much that I can see. I think if I showed it to him, I don't know if he would see it. Like, but it's there. So yeah.
Well, please join me in thanking Maggie Umber.
Oh.